This morning on Carolina This Week, the man who most likely represents you in Washington, Tom Rice, is with us. He's our 7th District Congressman. Carolina This Week starts right now.
This is Carolina This Week. Carolina This Week with Tim McGinnis.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us. 7th District Congressman Tom Rice began his 2nd term in office last month, and he's with us this morning to talk a little bit about hopefully what you plan on doing for your constituency over the next year, couple years. First, I want to talk to you in the news lately, $2 million for Georgetown for port dredging. For people, this is touted as a big deal, but I think Georgetown is so far away to so many people in the district that we're like, well, what's $2 million for Georgetown going to mean to people in Florence or in Darlington or in even Horry County? How important is the $2 million that was secured for that funding project?
Well, federal investment in infrastructure means jobs, and Georgetown is a bulk carrier. It'll never compete with Charleston. It'll never be a container port. But there are businesses that need bulk transport. One of them is ArcelorMittal Steel in Georgetown. They bring in their ore from the Caribbean. Right now it is shipped into Wilmington, put on rail and carried to Georgetown, and that just adds to their cost. Steel is a high overhead, low margin business, and so if Georgetown is going to continue to compete, they need every advantage that they can, and that's true of there's a cement company in Georgetown, there's a sheetrock company in Georgetown, of course agricultural products ship in bulk. So federal investment in infrastructure means jobs, and the nameplate on my desk says jobs, jobs, jobs. That's the most important issue still to people in this district.
And there are a lot of things that we could talk about this morning as far as foreign policy. We can talk about Obamacare. We could talk about these different things. But I really kind of want to hit what looks like is shaping up to be the big drive heading toward 2016, which is the fight for the middle class and for jobs and for the economy. So I kind of want to stick at least the beginning of our conversation along with a lot of that. I was in Columbia last week for the legislative reception, and I-73, I hadn't seen such a push for I-73 in a long time. You sit on the Transportation Committee. Tell me a little bit about where we stand on I-73. Are we any closer beginning your 2nd term than we were beginning your 1st term to I-73?
Absolutely. Now, are we laying pavement? No, we're not. Are we still acquiring right-of-way? Some. But the main thing we're doing is trying to get the permit, and we can't do anything until we get the permit. So when I got to Congress almost exactly 2 years ago, I asked the Army Corps of Engineers for a meeting, and I said I want to talk about the Georgetown Port, I-73, and Highway 31, which had been held up by the Army Corps and environmentalists for 2 years. And they told me it'd be 1 to 3 years on Highway 31 to get the permit. They told me it'd be 3 to 5 years minimum on I-73. And they told me that for the Georgetown Port, I just had to help them find the money. Well, we've cobbled together. Mostly it's $18 million from the state, $5 million from the Ports Authority, $6 million from the voters in Georgetown, and now 2, but I got to get a little bit more from the federal government. Hopefully we'll get that in the next year for the Georgetown Port. And on I-73, well, let's step back to 31. They told me it'd be 1 to 3 years on Highway 31. I said, fine, I want a checklist of everything we have to do, and I want to meet monthly and talk about what we've done on the checklist. Same thing on I-73. And in April, 3 months later, I had the permit for 31. Here we sit 2 years later, and we're in negotiations for the mitigation. They say we're destroying 280 acres of wetlands between the North Carolina border and Highway 22. I think that's crazy. I think actually what we're doing is creating wildlife habitat. You know, the bridges, people fish under the bridges. We know why. That's where the fish are. But anyway, to replace that 280 acres of wetlands, they want us to buy 6,800 acres. So we're negotiating to try to get the best deal we can for the taxpayers and to move the permit along in an expeditious fashion. I'm hoping to have the permit, here in the next year. We got a highway bill will be coming down this year, and hopefully we can figure out a way to get some things started on I-73.
It's taken such a long time to get I-73 off the ground. And I've sensed in my 6 years here, I've sensed there's a lot of excitement, like it's going to happen, it's imminent, to maybe it's not, it's further down the road. And then I've even heard a lot of people, and not just Democrats, but Republicans too, who say, you know what, maybe forget about I-73. Let's put our focus someplace else because this is too much of a pipe dream?
Well, I will say that the permit wasn't moving a whole lot when I got to Congress. There wasn't a whole lot of investment behind it, but I have absolutely reinvigorated it. And I do have monthly meetings with the Corps, with the Department of Natural Resources, with the SCDOT. I get everybody on the phone and say, okay, what have we done and where are we? And we are absolutely making progress. If I can get this mitigation finished here pretty quick, I expect to have a permit, and then I'll be looking to federal sources. Again, just like Georgetown, you know, we had to make our case for the merit of the project. Earmarks or no more. I can't go and say I allocate this much money to a project. I have to make my case to the administration for the merit of the project, and they found merit in Georgetown, and I'm confident they're going to find merit in I-73 too. It's too important, this region, and not just to the beach. I mean, it crosses Marion County, highest unemployment in the state. It crosses Dillon County, 7th highest unemployment, and Marlborough County, 3rd highest unemployment in the state. It is an area of the state that's been overlooked in infrastructure for decades. We desperately need that road. We need it for safety, for hurricane evacuation. We need it for economic development, for tourism, and for these disadvantaged counties. There are a lot of reasons why we need to have this road.
Well, and speaking of those disadvantaged counties and talking about jobs, with the high unemployment rate in our area, can government help create jobs in these areas, or should government get out of the way and maybe that would create jobs in these areas?
The government absolutely creates barriers, and you've heard me say this before, Tim, that so many counties across the country compete with other counties for jobs, and some do better than others. And that once Horry County, for example, decided to get in the game, things started happening pretty quickly. Florence County's done a great job. Dillon's had some good announcements here lately. Some states do better than others. South Carolina certainly has, you know, restructured its tax system, its regulatory system, and you've seen what's happened. BMW, Boeing, Michelin, Continental, and on and on and on. Unfortunately, our national leaders haven't seen fit to make this country competitive. Our states and our counties are competing for a declining pool of jobs. Every month you read about another American company that is going overseas, whether it be Pfizer or GE is moving things overseas, or whether it be Burger King, for goodness sake, moving to Canada. When you have the highest corporate tax rate in the world, stiff regulatory environment, it just makes it where we're not competitive. And our attitude at one time in Horry County was, you know, we're big and people are going to come anyway, and that's been our attitude in the United States. And what we've got to do is take that competitive attitude that's been adopted by South Carolina, by a lot of the counties in this district, take that to Washington and get them to work on being more competitive. And we've had some success there. You know, John Boehner, I've brought experts in competitiveness to Washington and had seminars for congressmen to talk to people about what it takes to be competitive. And John Boehner, the Speaker of the House, made American competitiveness his theme for this Congress. And we had something to do with that. And I think it's already starting to change. You're hearing people on both sides of the aisle saying that we need to be more competitive.
Will this area, you think, become more competitive for South Carolina now that we have our own congressman? We have some of the most powerful people in state government from the area, Speaker of the House, President Pro Tem of the Senate, and we have some of our local representatives actually sitting on committees in Columbia now. Are we, and you've been in politics around here for about a decade now, or at least you've been around the edges of it. How do you feel, what kind of position of power do we sit in now? You think we might be able to start getting some of the things that the Charlestons and the Greenvilles have been getting for a long time, but maybe we've missed out?
I think we're in a much better position than we've been since in the last 30 years. And you can see good things happening already. You know, unfortunately, we're in a time of austerity in government where there's really not a lot of assets to build infrastructure. But what there is, you can already see things happening in this district, like with Georgetown, for example, like moving on I-73. And then also you can see it in job announcements. I mean, there have been good job announcements these last few years in Horry County, in Florence County, Chesterfield County, and in Dillon. Dillon just had that, I'm trying to remember the name of the company, went out of my head, but they're a Fortune 500 company and a Boeing supplier, 300 jobs. ENA is expanding in Chesterfield County. That's another 300 jobs. We've had a number of job announcements in Florence and in Horry County. Things are looking up.
I want to talk about the committees you sit on. We'll talk about budget in a few minutes. But I think the one that might contribute to our conversation is you sit on a small business committee that looks out for small businesses, and I think that we've got to be probably the capital of small business, at least in South Carolina, maybe in the country, in Horry County at least. What's going to help small businesses? What's going to make a small business grow right now, and how are you going to help it?
Well, as you said, government just needs to get out of the way. We've already had a big snapback from the financial downturn we suffered 6-7 years ago if government hadn't gotten in the way. But the pendulum swung too far back, particularly Dodd-Frank banking law. That needs to be, either we need to just get rid of it or we need to exclude community banks. In December, we passed a law that brought the derivative trading back to the big banks. That was really what Dodd-Frank was designed to protect against. That's gone out of Dodd-Frank. And so small banks are unduly hurt, and they're the biggest provider of capital for small business. That really holds back small business, holds back hiring, holds back wage increases. The other thing is Obamacare. I mean, Obamacare, it puts penalties on people who go over 50 employees. It puts penalties on people that employ people full time, this 30-hour work week requirement. So those two things are huge additions to the regulatory framework for small business, huge burdens that have been added to small business since the president's been in office the last 6 years, and you can see the result. It's holding back hiring, it's holding back wage growth. Average household income in America since the president's been in office has dropped 8.7%. At the same time, gas prices, utility cost, health insurance cost, food prices are all come up. I call it the middle class squeeze. And I actually have a bill I'm going to be dropping it next week. What it says is that even though middle class average household incomes have dropped 8.7%, people that work in the federal government, the bureaucrats that come up with all these rules, their incomes have gone up. They hadn't been affected by this downturn. So what I propose is to drop the incomes of all bureaucrats and congressmen and the president by 8.7%, the same amount all the average household income's gone down, and to bring theirs up as the average household income comes up to a maximum of 105%, to give them incentive so that they'll know when they make decisions that hold up infrastructure, when they make the decisions that add to the burden of small business, that it affects them and their pocketbook, and hopefully they'll start thinking like private enterprise does and trying to move things forward.
But shouldn't voters be doing that job, and if they don't do it, they don't stay in office?
Yeah, absolutely, yes, they should.
Let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about Obamacare, and I want to talk about the budget. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Congressman Tom Rice. Welcome back. Congressman Tom Rice is my guest this morning. We touched on Obamacare before the break, and I want to kind of get more into the budget. I want to talk about how Obamacare might play into the House version of a budget that you all are working on right now. I put out I solicited for questions on Facebook. What do people have to? And nobody gave me a specific question, but there's this feeling, I think, among a lot of people that Congress just isn't doing a whole lot other than attacking the president. And it seems like Obamacare is an easy thing to attack on and to hold votes against, but is that really going to do anything to actually solve anything?
Well,
or just dismantling it?
What people have to keep in mind that the lack of things coming out of Congress in the last at least 2 years since I've been in was a design thing between Harry Reid and the president. They felt like if nothing came out of Congress, that gave the president more leeway to act on his own through executive order. And so Harry Reid blocked almost every single thing that came out of the House, including the budget. It's a fascinating thing to me that an entity as complex as the federal government has operated without a budget for 6 years. You can hardly operate a household, or much less a small business, without a budget. The House Budget Committee has adopted budgets the 2 years I was there that would have balanced in 10 years. Now, there were some reforms in there, obviously, and the Senate didn't take them up. The Senate did pass a budget last year for the first time in 6 years as a result of the no budget, no pay law that we passed. And they wouldn't even conference. So that was a big disappointment to me. I think you're going to see a big change now because Harry Reid doesn't have the gavel. Republicans have the Senate and the House. The president, for the first time since he's been in office, presented his budget on time this year, on February the 1st. The House is supposed to present its budget by March 15th. And the Budget Committee works very, very hard at the beginning of the year to get that done. We had like 7 or 8 meetings of that one committee last week, and we'll do it again this week when I go back. And I anticipate we'll pass another budget that passes in 10 years. Now, how does it do that? What do we change? We really don't slow the growth of, most people think of government spending, they think about departments of the government like the EPA or the IRS or Homeland Security or the CIA, those kind of things, the education or whatever. That's only a small part of the budget. That's called non-defense discretionary spending. Defense is its own pile. Mm-hmm. Non-defense discretionary spending is only about 15% of the budget. Defense is only about 15% of the budget. The other 70% is in interest we pay on the debt and what they call the entitlement program, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, welfare, unemployment, food stamps, on and on and on. We'll never fix the budget problems if we just focus on non-defense discretionary. We're going to have to work on that 70% of the budget as well. So what the House Budget Committee's budget did last year is we did something called premium support for Medicare, which allows private companies to bid on providing Medicare coverage. We put in delay in the retirement age over a long period of time. It gradually increases the retirement age. We repealed Obamacare. That's a $2.1 trillion savings over 10 years. And we slowed the growth of the non-defense discretionary spending. And the result of those are the primary 3 things we did, balances the budget in 10 years. When I got to Congress, I thought that our debt was the most daunting challenge we faced, and it would be very, very difficult to bring it into balance. After being there for 2 years, I don't believe that anymore. I think the most daunting challenge that we face is our regulatory structure. Now, we have to move on our debt or it will overcome us. The debt held by the public is 72% of GDP, gross domestic product. It hadn't been that high ever in the history of this country except for World War II. And the Congressional Budget Office, which is nonpartisan, it's not Republican, it's not Democrat, will tell you very clearly we're on an unsustainable course. We have got to get Social Security and Medicare to be self-sustaining. We've got to make promises. The promises we made in the past, we've got to make them good. Now, the president's budget he proposed last week raises $2 trillion in taxes and spends $4 trillion more money. It never comes into balance, and it just creates a slew of additional government programs. And I asked the director of O&D last week in the Budget Committee hearing, I said, do you fix Social Security and Medicare? And he gave a long gobbledygook answer, and I said, that doesn't sound like a yes to me. So you're not fixing Social Security and Medicare, and you're making a lot of new promises and new government programs. I said, don't you think that we ought to make good on the promises we've already made before we start making more promises?
Well, and I think speaking on behalf of a lot of the viewers out there, you pay into Social Security, you pay into Medicare, and you hope that when you need that money, that it's going to be there. And I think the big fear, particularly among maybe younger generations, is I'm never going to see that money that I paid into Social Security for all those years.
Oh, and Congressional Budget Office, the Office of Management and Budget, the White House Budgeting Office will tell you that the trust funds for Social Security and Medicare will both be exhausted in the year around 2030, 2031, somewhere in there. So no, we got to fix it, and the House Budget Committee's plan fixes Medicare. It doesn't deal with Social Security. I'm getting ready to introduce a bill that would work on Social Security here in the next few weeks myself.
I want to go back to something you said a moment ago. You said that you thought that the budget was going to be the big thing and tackling the deficit, but you said it's the regulatory structure. Mm-hmm. What specifically? What? Oh,
I see so many things that just scare me to death in terms of how the government stops all progress. For example, the scariest story I've seen in Congress, I've told you before, was when the head of the Florida port system came in begging to get congressional approval to deepen the Miami port. They'd already gotten approval once. They were using their own money, no federal money. They knew that was a pipe dream. They'd gotten congressional approval once, but the permit had taken so long to get, the environmental permit, that the money we'd authorized wasn't sufficient anymore. I said, well, how long have you been trying to get the environmental permit? He said we started in 1998. Took 16 years, and the Army Corps still hadn't given them a permit. Charleston, the Army Corps has been studying for 5 years now. They get issued a preliminary report a couple of months ago. They're hoping that they'll have it dredged by 2020. Panama Canal is going to open next year. If our importers and exporters and manufacturers in this district don't have access to that port, they start out $800 a container behind the rest of the world. Every port that has access to those deep water ports is going to be in a competitive position. And the Army Corps is going to hold us up for 5 more years? No, our regulatory system is completely out of hand. The environmental system, you know, they're not protecting the environment in Charleston. In the end, they're going to dredge that port. If you ask Secretary Darcy in the Army Corps, she'll say, yeah, in the end, we're going to dredge that port. Well, what are we waiting for is what I want to know. If we know we're going to dredge the port in the end, let's go ahead and do the job. Let's get it open when the Panama Canal opens, and then we can talk about mitigation later. Why are we waiting for 10 years to get this project done? It's just fascinating to me.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll wrap up a few loose ends. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Tom Rice. Well, as is always the case when you're here, we use up all of our time, and it seems to go by like that. Last question for you this morning. Quickly, what do you hope comes out of this session of Congress?
I hope we get a budget that balances our budget within a reasonable period of time. I hope we get a resolution that does away with the President's unilateral executive order on immigration. And I hope we get the Keystone Pipeline approved. You got a little while longer, I'll keep listing things for you. Now, there's a lot to be done.
Do you think there's going to be compromise?
Oh, yes, sir. If we don't compromise, we're not going to get anything done.
All right. Congressman Tom Rice, thanks as always for coming in and talking with me.
Thank you.
All right. Stay with us. We'll be right back. That's all for Carolina this week. Hope to see you back here next Sunday morning at 11 a.m. Have a great week.